I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guests today are Bonni Rambatan and Jacob Johanssen. They're here to discuss their new book, Event Horizon: Sexuality, Politics, Online Culture, and the Limits of Capitalism. Bonni Rambatan is an independent scholar and researcher based in Jakarta, Indonesia, as well as a writer and artist for various comics, novels, films, installations, and other media. They co-founded and currently run a comic book company, Now Boon, focusing on making progressive thoughts available to young readers. They started and edited the anthology Cyborg Subjects: Discourses on Digital Culture with Jacob Johanssen on Create Space in 2013. Their research interests include Lacanian psychoanalysis, media studies, literary and art criticism, Japanese studies, philosophy, and critical theory. For research and artistic projects, their affiliations include the Japan Foundation, the Vienna-based art technology philosophy group Monochrome, as well as various art and literary institutions in Indonesia. You can follow them on Twitter at Bonnibel R. That's BONNIBEL _R at Twitter. Jacob Johanssen is Senior Lecturer in Communications at St. Mary's University in London. He is the author of Psychoanalysis and Digital Culture, Audiences, Social Media, and Big Data from Routledge 2019, as well as his brand new book, Fantasy, Online Misogyny, and the Manosphere, also from Routledge 2021. His research interests include psychoanalysis and digital media, sexuality, affect theories, psychosocial studies, and critical theory. He is the co-editor of the Counterspace section at the journal Psychoanalysis, Culture, and Society. He sits on the executive committee of the Association for Psychosocial Studies and is a founding scholar of the British Psychoanalytic Council. You can follow him at Twitter at Jacob PhD. That's at JACOB_PhD at Twitter. As with all Rendering Unconscious podcast episodes, there is a video accompanying this episode at YouTube. Just visit Trapart Film's YouTube channel. That's TRAPART Film at YouTube, or search for Rendering Unconscious podcast. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. You can visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast's main website, renderingunconscious.org, for links and more information. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at rawsin_. That's RAWSIN_. Rendering Unconscious is also a book, Rendering Unconscious: Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry, from Trapart Books 2019. For more information, you can visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast at our Patreon, patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. That's VANESSA23CARL. Your support is very appreciated. Thank you so much for supporting Rendering Unconscious podcast, and all of my other creative endeavors.
We could begin by how we got into psychoanalysis, maybe, because actually that's something I don't think I really know about you, Bonni. How
That's true.
That would be interesting to hear about, I think.
Okay, sure. Okay, so how did I get into psychoanalysis? I guess it's I majored in English literature in college at my university, and I just I guess there are a lot of like critical theory. I got introduced to critical theory and philosophy and all those things through English literature. And I guess I just really like psychoanalysis. I really like Lacan, especially. I think, I mean, obviously I've studied Freud and Lacan before, but I think what really got me into, utilizing psychoanalysis for critique was Slavoj Žižek. There were a lot of his videos. There was the documentary, and there was the Perverse Guide to Cinema, and all those things. Those media that came out as I was studying English literature, and I decided to pursue it further and read more about psychoanalytic theories. And I think who was I think it was Madan Dolan, wasn't it? Who the one who utilized theories of the psychoanalytic voice, and I was using him for using his works for analyzing my thesis, like film studies and stuff like that, but not with the images, but with the audio. I think that's, yeah, I guess that's pretty much how I got into psychoanalysis, and I just kind of like fell in love with it, because I think there's a lot to be pursued, there's a lot to be expanded upon as we enter the digital age, right? Because that was also my thing with psychoanalysis, is that it does have a lot of potential, especially as being from English literature, which is pretty close to English linguistics and stuff. There were a lot of new dynamics, new movements going on in the direction of what the digital realm, what the digital culture can bring to us. And I thought, why not utilize psychoanalysis further to pursue those?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something Jacob and I have talked about before, and I've written about that. Like, I feel like the digital realm, really, everyone can see the psychoanalytic theory kind of at play. Like, there's so much things that maybe were not as obvious to people in the before times, but now it's like so clear, a lot of these concepts. So I feel like it's a really ripe time for psychoanalysis.
Yeah. And I think that was when those were also the times when I started writing a blog, my first blog. Well, it was like my third or something, but my first blog that I actually, became serious upon. And that's how I met Jacob. He was a reader of some of my posts, and he commented, and we just got to know each other. I think we emailed each other or something. So that was how we started.
Yeah. So that blog must have been sort of it must have been gaining some traction, because I discovered it somehow.
Yeah, so, it did gain traction. It gave me a lot of connections, to various like conferences and stuff like that. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. And that was when, when blogging was still, was still big. I mean, who blogs now? Nobody, right? So it was like a different internet age then. And that was kind of early, that was like 2005, 2006, something like that. Yeah.
Mm. Well, the blog was a bit, I think it was 2007, 2008-ish, but it was during those era.
The blog era, pre-social media era.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because I always knew that you had English literature as a background, and my kind of my background is kind of more like media studies, communication studies. So that's what I kind of studied, or from BA onwards. And I also kind of got into psychoanalysis, I think, at least to some extent, also through Žižek and all these funny videos and his kind of cool lectures and so on. But then I'm also still wondering whether I would kind of call myself a Lacanian. So even though, you know, what we've been kind of doing for the past years, for the last few years now, is very, very kind of Lacanian. But I'm also very interested in kind of sort of other schools in psychoanalysis, and I've been using Freud a lot and so on. But Lacan is still very, very fascinating to me. But I think Bonni's knowledge of Lacan far surpasses mine. So that that was a very fruitful way of kind of collaborating.
Yeah, I really don't think so. But yeah, thank you for saying that. I don't know, for me, well, my focus has been Lacan for so many years now. It's only pretty recently that I started to try to move beyond Lacan, right? In our book is heavily Lacanian, but at the end, nearing the end there's like a certain push to go beyond Lacan, as it were. And I think that was one of my interests too, right? Because I really want to know how far, like how much further that we can take this, because obviously with digital media and with new theories of language and semiotics and stuff like that, there's a lot of updating, not exactly updating, but you get what I mean, right? With Lacanian theories, I feel like there's a lot of push that a lot of innovations that we can move forward with, utilizing those theories, but also moving beyond Lacan.
I mean, that's interesting actually, because I think that's also, I think maybe especially in kind of Lacanian psychoanalysis, because it is so popular and it's quite dominant, I think, still in kind of applications, or if there are people who use psychoanalysis to look at even kind of culture more broadly, not just kind of the digital. Lacan is very popular, but then I think psychoanalysis often gets this kind of criticism that how it is applied, it's actually very static actually, because people are not really inventing or pushing things more kind of further, and that also with Lacan, it's, you know, the same concepts get used and sort of used time and time again, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I mean, because then we're undermining our own position here. But I think it's still an interesting kind of critique that's put to psychoanalysis, that even as a kind of clinical kind of discipline, to what extent is it being sort of renewed or innovated? I don't know, which is interesting. Yeah, but I mean that's just a side note. Because we wouldn't have written a book that's so heavily Lacanian if we didn't believe in, you know, in the value of it for kind of thinking about the contemporary sort of digital moment that we're in. Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
But it's great to think about it. I mean, he died 40 years ago, so it's great to think about it through his lens, but then take it further. And I think the digital realm is taking it further, and like, you know, with online treatment as well, you know, I do that, and it's like, you know, people, that's not really been conceptualized because we didn't have a digital world when a lot of these writers were writing. So I think it is time for people to keep taking it further. And to me, it's so strange when people become dogmatic about psychoanalytic theory, because it's so opposed to being dogmatic. It's supposed to be about kind of freeing up the creative energy to invent new things, and not to like lock them down. We have enough of that kind of categorization and locking people into place. We need to free up our drives and free up our energy to like invent new things. So it's really weird to me whenever people get dogmatic about theory.
I think that's one of the, if not the most exciting thing about Lacan for me, because he very clearly stated that psychoanalysis is not supposed to be like science, right? It's not supposed to be something fixed, but, you know, meaning is decided between, like, as a dialogue instead of something dictated by the analyst. And I think that's that needs to be applied to psychoanalysis as a discipline as a whole as well, right? Because it should be liberating in a sense, because that's the whole spirit of it. So I think in theory, the theoretical discipline in and of itself has to be continuously reinventing itself. So that's why I really like it.
And then how did you two decide to write this book? I'll say the title again: Event Horizon: Sexuality, Politics, Online Culture, and the Limits of Capitalism. How did you two come together to write this?
I think probably partly because of the sort of history that we share. What we were talking about just earlier, that we met at a time sort of online when the internet was slightly a slightly different place, I think, to what it is now, and people were still blogging, and I don't know, maybe the only the sort of social media that were around at that time was something like MySpace. I think it was MySpace still. Were people still using MySpace then? I can't remember. Probably.
I know.
Probably I was using it at least.
Okay.
Things were. I mean, the internet back then wasn't as kind of commodified. It wasn't as kind of dominated by capital. Big tech wasn't really a term. If someone had used the term big tech then, nobody would have known what that meant. And now we are kind of lots of good things have happened. I mean, as well online in the last couple of years, but it's certainly been much more kind of commodified and polarized and sort of very angry. Also, I think the internet is very angry. It's a very angry place. Often, it's a very bad place in a way, and I think that motivated us as well to write something about trying to kind of understand where we are at the moment. How can Lacanian kind of take on the contemporary internet, and how the internet overall, I think, has been kind of turning right wing. How can we analyze those kind of dynamics, those developments from a psychoanalytic perspective?
And also, when we started working together, like that was again 2007, 2008. We had so much optimism for for the potentials of the internet, right? It was like the early days of the Occupy movement has not even started yet, but then there was the Arab Spring, there was the whole, I think, Snowden whistleblowing at WikiLeaks. So there's a lot of hope that happened on the internet. People organizing, and then there was this whole big revolutions that are that seem to be happening, seem to be changing across the world, and we were very optimistic about that. So in my earlier writings, in our earlier collaborations, we were trying to pinpoint these locations of possible new events, possible new revolutions made possible by the internet, right? But then we kind of things kind of happen, and then the zeitgeist of the digital space became warped. It just changed. Like a lot of pessimism came in, and things didn't go the way they did. After the revolutions, there's a lot of right-wing movements came about and took power in these regions, and then there's the whole just became completely pessimistic. There's a lot more doom in the world, in the zeitgeist, in the minds of people utilizing the internet. And obviously there's a lot of, as Jacob has mentioned, a lot of right-wing movements, a lot of new kinds of fascism, and new kinds of like misogyny and transphobia and all those things. And we were kind of like, we were both like very intrigued, but also annoyed is a very mild word. Something's just right here, and we felt like we needed to write about this. We need to discover more about this, and like what is to be done here. What is next? What can theory do to actually help like analyze how we got to this place, and how it might be possible to get out of it, to move forward from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course, I mean, it has become such a corporate space, and such a big tech, big data space. Whereas, of course, when it started, there was all this optimism and hope that everybody could be like kind of equal on the internet, and your website could be found just as easily as like a big brand's website, for whatever you're doing and things like that. And it has like changed like the music industry. Like people can put their own music and their own art, and I feel like it's so refreshing to see like people have been able to express themselves so much more freely without having to go through these gatekeepers, and you can find different artists and musicians and of every kind and any kind, and that's so wonderful. So how do we like keep harnessing like everyone being able to be themselves and be individuals and like have a voice against this kind of big corporate industrial military complex tech data trying to go to Mars situation? Destroying the environment situation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think yeah, Vanessa, you're right, and I think you have quite a positive view of the internet overall, don't you? I think, which is which is very good, and maybe counterbalances our view a little bit. But I think what we are focusing on to some degree, at least in the book, is social media, particularly as kind of as commercial platforms where things are things are not right, and I agree that there are kind of other spaces on the internet where people can upload their music or their art or whatever. That's very important, and that's also present. But then it seems like how kind of users or subjects get together on the internet or interact with each other on the internet very often is very, very problematic. And I think that was one starting point for us as well.
Yeah, what we wanted to do is basically we don't want to write a book that's pessimistic, obviously, because we think the current zeitgeist, the current ideology functions in a way that you're either pessimistic, like you're either a doomer, like technology is really bad, it's not the way to go. It's like you have to unplug or everything, just be completely pessimistic about technology, or you can become optimistic with one single correct way, which is the neoliberal way, like startups are truly changing the world and making a lot of difference and stuff like that, which is, those seem to be our only option, whether either we hate technology or we love technology in a capitalistic way. But we wanted to analyze where these sentiments come from and whether there are alternatives, and we believe there are alternatives, but it's gonna be a huge task, because obviously the control of we don't want to what is it yeah we don't want to take like the control that technology has in our lives right now, but at the same time we don't want to be completely pessimistic about it, right? There has to be a way to have a to have an outlook, to have a sense that a revolution is possible, and that's what we're trying to do with our work.
Yeah, no, because the data mining is so out of control, and you're probably a little more pessimistic, Jacob, like you said, probably because you know more than I do about what's going on. Like yesterday, I was on a hike in the forest, and I had my phone in my backpack, and then when I came back, of course, there was like an Instagram ad for like such a specific thing that I mentioned. That's like, I do not talk about this all the time, and it's like, wow, from my backpack, it heard me mention this when I was in the forest, and it's showing me ads for it, and that's just like a small thing, but it's things that you notice all the time. And then it's like, what are all the things that are happening that I have no idea are happening with these things that I'm saying that it's hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we kind of pick up in the or kind of look at in the book, actually, in quite a bit of detail in the first chapter, really starting in the first chapter, where looking at this sort of complex of big tech and how it's also kind of coupled now with AI, data analytics, all these sorts of things, that there is this kind of ideology now in Silicon Valley and beyond, that through technology, that technology is able to kind of know our desires, know everything about us better than we could ever possibly sort of imagine, and then it's able to kind of things can follow on from that, or as you say, something can be recommended to you on Instagram or whatever, but there is a flaw there, we think, where of course there is a big difference. There will always be a difference to how we are online, or how we kind of present ourselves online, and who we are as fully complex kind of human beings. And the question is whether, those in Silicon Valley who make all those, or kind of create all those platforms, whether they really, believe that they can actually kind of know our desires, that they can actually that there is a complete alignment between who we are online and who we are sort of beyond the internet as well. And we that's one way kind of how we look at this is through Lacan, and through kind of ideas about misrecognition, which is kind of quite central to Lacan.
Yeah, like they're equating who we are with what we consume.
Yeah, there's this whole there's this whole belief, pervasive belief everywhere, primarily in Silicon Valley, but also everywhere, that we are, essentially we're data. We can be fully represented by the data gathered about us. And I think it's almost spiritual in a way, because you really have to believe in that if you want to believe that technology can do good, that technology, the way to solve problems is just more better algorithms and better AI and better better technology, essentially, to solve the problems created by capital instead of the distribution of technology. There's a whole belief that the solution is just more technology in the same capitalist framework, right? Which we think, we basically the entire book talks about why that is that should not be the case, and why that that is a harmful approach to take, right? But there's almost I said spiritual here because then you go on to talking about what consciousness is, and transhumanism, and uploading our consciousness to the web, and making AI that's just conscious. There's this whole fantasy landscape that's just, even outside of Silicon Valley, and in sci-fi and everything, is just the ideal person who can fulfill our desires are the ones that just can gather as much data about us as possible, right? I think there's a very strong belief in that sense, that structures our fantasy in a way that's just really pushing. If you believe in that fantasy, then obviously the solution is more technology, right? Is better just give all of those entrepreneurs more money, because then they can solve racism or whatever by creating more data points, by extracting more data points. And we think this is just relying on the idea of private property, right? Like who owns these data, who owns the algorithms, who decide to code those algorithms, and who produces knowledge, who produces all of these kinds of not only data, but like how the data is gathered and how it is interpreted, and so on. And we think there's a sheer lack of systemic analysis in all of these, and that's why we're writing the book. Obviously there's a lot of people who are already studying about this, but we feel that by utilizing Lacan, by really analyzing these technologies in a way that's not really technophobic, in a way that's not really, the solution is not to completely unplug or just do little local revolutions and just little local economies and stuff like that. By really tackling these larger issues and asking what the systemic nature of all of these algorithms are, and how we might better design technologies that are more inclusive in a way, not only inclusive, but also very much Marxist, in a way that's just not focusing on the production of knowledge, on the means of the production of knowledge being owned by several corporations, but how we could really distribute this more fairly to the users, right? Of course, that's a very tall order, but at least there should be a vision, like there should be a possibility first in towards that direction.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at this from the side of kind of big tech, Silicon Valley, and so on, as we do, is that there's clearly kind of, we're clearly sort of critiquing that, and at the same time, we're also kind of looking at, or we're spending quite a bit of time looking at this from the perspective of the kind of user, or of ordinary users, where it's also very, it's very kind of reassuring, or it's potentially very sort of containing in the psychoanalytic sense, for users, that there are these platforms, that there are these kind of fantasies about AI and data and so on, that can kind of hold users in this kind of space, and can sort of give us everything we desire. So that's very that's very yeah, it's very kind of reassuring. It's very sort of beneficial, but then of course it's always disappointed because it doesn't work, and it's it's just a fantasy, it's just an ideology, because what we sort of also then sort of bring to these debates, as Bonni said, there are also other scholars, also kind of Lacanian thinkers, who make sort of similar arguments, Jody Dean being one of them, or more recently Matthew Flisfeeder. He's also they've also made sort of arguments in relation to social media being, or kind of taking on the kind of status of the Lacanian big other, and so on. But what we are sort of then also bringing to these debates, I think, is looking at the kind of at the user as at the subject kind of more specifically, and for example, talking about something like selfies, or the selfie, where very often the selfie is sort of discussed in kind of popular media and so on, as we are just all kind of narcissists now. It's just an act of narcissism, that's kind of amplified by Instagram, and it's just it's just a kind of superficial platform and things like that. But we are kind of saying, no, actually, we need to, if we really want to look at the selfie, in more kind of detail, it's actually a user who, or the subject, who is very, very vulnerable, and who is really kind of bearing all through the selfie, and wants to be kind of recognized. There is this kind of desire for recognition, or wants to feel kind of valued and so on, through interactions online, and through likes and comments and so on, by other users on the internet as well. So it's not just kind of aimed at the big other, but it's actually a very, very a very vulnerable sort of act in itself, that kind of shows where this kind of Silicon Valley mindset is so so perverse, because it taps into this vulnerability, but then just kind of exploits that, and never really delivers on what is sort of being promised to all of us.
And yeah, I mean, I can completely, obviously, because we wrote the book together, but as someone who posts relatively a lot of selfies, I do very much agree, because because that's what it is, right? That's the mode of communication that we have. That's the mode of desiring that we have right now. And I think I would go. We did go one step further in the book, in which we made the point that even leftist anger is often a commodity designed by the algorithm to create more engagement, right? I think that's the tricky part, because it's trendy to be a communist on Twitter, for example. It's very trendy to be to create discourse, right? To be angry, to pile on some people for making bad takes. But that's the tricky part. We think that we are being critical, we are being revolutionary, and of course, to a certain extent, we are by 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 creating these various discourse, by hopefully exposing people to certain kinds of revolutionary thought. Of course, there's a lot of good there, but at the same time, it's not a replacement for the actual work of building alternatives, right? Because a lot of people, they a lot of communists, they just they get angry on Twitter, and that is trendy. And again, no, I'm not trying to dismiss them completely. Obviously, if that's the level of engagement that you are capable of right now by spreading all of these discourse, then by all means go ahead and do that. But if you start to assume these kinds of self-righteousness, and then assume these kinds of conflict as your primary source of jouissance, as primary source of enjoyment, by creating discourse, by creating conflict online, that's not serving anyone but the but the big other, but the in this case the very real corporations behind those platforms, because then you're just creating more engagement for them by creating antagonism, by creating pain, by creating harm towards others. And yeah, that's the tricky part, right? Even our what seems to be very critical discourse is actually, it can be monetized very easily by things that we don't, by platforms that we don't see. We see obviously, but we don't really think about them that much, since they're in the background.
Yeah, and I don't think most people know or are thinking about how they actually work, like you said, because these algorithms, they're not, well, I'm sure they look at the content of what you're saying also to do things, but as far as like the rage kind of factor, they don't really know what side of you're on. They're just like promoting things that get more attention. And of course, the people that do that, they say something angry, then they get a lot of likes, then that makes them promoted to do more of that, because they're like, oh, I get a lot of attention when I do that, because that's just like a natural human thing to do. And it just goes on and on. And maybe that's part of why it's so polarized, of people arguing all the time, because that's kind of what keeps getting like promoted and shared and rewarded.
So when people talk about I think the crude understanding of when I tell people, hey, I do psychoanalysis to criticize online culture, usually what people think is that you analyze what goes on behind inside of people's minds before they interact online, and then the online world is just something else, so you analyze what's in people's minds. But that's not the case at all, because again, with psychoanalysis, we know that the actual scene of the unconscious is very much structured in the online space itself. Algorithms isn't something, it's not something, okay, so we have something and then we pour it out online and then algorithms do their rate. No, that scene, that online, is the other scene that Freud talks about. That's the unconscious. That's, so again, our unconscious is shaped by all of these new algorithms that, that a handful of people are designing, just really affected by AI and big data and all of these things. And a lot of the time we don't realize that the source of our jouissance, even if that may seem revolutionary at the time, it's very much designed by these algorithms. And some people somewhere write code to change our behavior in ways that we might not fully understand. And I think that's the thing that needs most critical insight right now today.
Yeah. And I think earlier we were talking about Lacan and sort of our interests and so on. And I think one other kind of major thinker who we really draw on in the book, and this kind of works well to talk about him now maybe a little bit, is Japanese philosopher, critic, cultural critic, Hiroki Azuma, who wrote a book in the 90s, right? In the sort of late 90s, it came out.
Late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, late 90s.
Japanese, about otaku and kind of otaku culture. So otaku being sort of the kind of Japanese term for what we could call kind of, you know, geeks or kind of
Nerds.
hardcore fans. And Azuma also, he draws a little bit on kind of Lacan, Zizek, and psychoanalysis in his book, but then he also really kind of sort of uses his own concepts, his own thinking to kind of come to terms how kind of, you know, Japanese culture, society brought about or kind of led to this phenomenon of you know, of the otaku as a particular kind of identity or kind of subject formation. And not what I mean, we're not wanting to go into too much detail because we also talk about it in the book, so people should read the book. But Azuma kind of, he has this idea of the kind of sort of the database, and that otaku, how they sort of articulate their fandom of, you know, anime, manga, particular characters, particular shows or content is kind of shaped or kind of brings about a kind of what he calls sort of logic of the database, whereby how kind of particular sort of characters are kind of, you know, are sort of broken down, right? Broken down by fans, by otaku in specific sort of segments. What kind of, you know, what sort of clothes they wear, and very often it's also, you know, kind of, yeah, female characters, and it's sort of got its level of kind of sexism sort of attached to that as well. What clothes they wear, what you know, hairstyle there is, and so on. It's kind of sort of broken down quite literally by otaku in creating their own kind of websites or kind of, you know, archives of sort of that sort of content that is, you know, that they can search, or kind of, you know, where they can find particular, you know, characters and their kind of features and so on. So that's kind of this sort of starting point for Azuma to kind of come up with this sort of idea of the database. And we thought, you know, that is so, you know, that was so kind of innovative at that time when it first came out. That was so radical, so interesting. We wanted to really kind of draw on his ideas in order to kind of think about the contemporary kind of moment where we are sort of arguing this sort of database logic is now inherent to the internet as a whole, and to how all of us behave online. We're all kind of sort of breaking things down into particular signifiers or you know, content, or how we relate to, you know, each other online is kind of all sort of happens through this kind of database sort of logic, and through kind of this sort of way of consumption.
We found a really interesting parallel between Azuma and Lacan's discourse of capitalism, which Azuma didn't really mention. But yeah, to get a bit technical here, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with the reversal of the arrows in the discourse of capitalism, right? And then Azuma also talks about reversing. He calls it reading up. So it's, you know, the arrows might be a bit, the orientation of the direction might be a bit different, but he. Both Lacan and Azuma talks about how it's no longer ideology dictating us from either our unconscious or, you know, from above, but it's us actually taking things apart and shoving them into this database, into this master signifier, right? That's the reversal of arrows both in Lacan and in Azuma, which we explored further in the book. But the idea is that we're not just consuming things, but we are taking them apart, categorizing them, and collecting them into a collective database for others to recycle and reuse. And then the connectedness of the internet, of the database, that really affects the way that we relate to the big other, to the master signifier, because it's no longer, you know, it's no longer obeying a master, but it's collectively constructing a master but at the same time, the way that we construct the master is also determined by by algorithms outside of our own control. So the whole loop in Lacan's discourse of capitalism, we really explored on that, and how that's how we could actually read the current way of knowledge production and of algorithms, and the way that people take their selfies and just put them online and create memes and just circulate them, how that is all connected in this whole loop of capitalism, and why it's becoming increasingly more difficult for us to create, to even imagine alternatives to digital capitalism.
Well, I'm so glad you all are thinking about this, because like you said, Matthew Fitzpater and like Isabel Miller, doing AA and psychoanalysis. It's so important that you all are thinking about this, because this industry has been dominated by people in Silicon Valley, by, like you said, these like four or five kind of corporations or people that are like, all of this is getting funneled through. They're creating that small of a handful of people that are all pretty much the same kind of person, should not be able to influence this huge population. It's like such a huge population, such a huge part of the world population is influenced by this, and it's like going through the hands of like so few people, and it's like really talk about monoculture. It's really just like such a narrow view being spread everywhere, and I feel like that's so dangerous. And and they're not psychoanalytically minded people that are thinking about human subjectivity, at all.
Well, maybe they are. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. Crudely. Maybe they sort of know more about psychoanalysis than any of us. Because otherwise, how could there be such a kind of complete fit between how we sort of fundamentally, how we are wired, sort of hardwired as subjects in a way, and then how these platforms work. There is some kind of very, very perverse, very neat kind of fit that seems to work, even though it's making us very often kind of miserable. I don't know. Yeah, that's just a thought.
My view is that the society, the Western society model that this is kind of grown out of, everything's like science and objectivity and markets and capitalism and all of this, it's like the obsessional mind frame, and like the obsessional mind frame has been turned into a society that we all are forced to live within, and then we just don't really have a choice. So like maybe it seems reflective because we've all grown up in this kind of mind frame, but really it's actually like one specific neurotic mind frame that is kind of just taken over way more than any one mind frame should have. That's how I feel. So is there anything else that you all wanted to mention that we didn't get to? I don't want to talk about how your ideas about how to do something different, because people should read your book. What are the alternative ways? Read the book.
Yeah, I think that comes that's part of the book. I mean, the book is it's a short, it's kind of short and very sort of accessible, I think, compared to traditional kind of very long academic books. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about so much yet, that we place a heavy kind of emphasis on, is connecting these kind of questions that we've talked about, not only to kind of politics and the kind of sort of right-wing status or kind of right-wing sort of politics that are emerging everywhere in the world and on the internet, but also to kind of questions of sexuality. And I think, again, that's where psychoanalysis is so important. And also, that sort of dimension maybe hasn't been kind of considered so much yet, also by scholars. There are some exceptions. Maybe is that, you mentioned Isabel Millar, who's kind of looking at AI and kind of questions of sexuality. But then this kind of link that we are making, that we were very keen to make, I think, also hadn't been maybe made on that level yet. I don't know if you do you want to say something about that, Bonni?
Yeah, no, I was gonna mention the idea of cuteness.
Yeah,
because that's also the thing is that the things that we actually dedicated a whole chapter of regarding cuteness and the theory of the the cute gaze, right? Because in a lot of when things we observe, and of course we read a lot of literature that actually state cuteness comes from a time when the predominant emotion is defeat. Because when people are victorious, the desire for aesthetics is a lot more powerful and strong and just masculine and stuff. And but then the whole trauma of defeat, even in Japan, and that's why that's partially why it gets popular around the world, because there's no this aesthetics of beauty that's vulnerable, but that's not exactly it, because we also following Xian Gai and a few other theorists. Cuteness, the cute gaze, is actively rendering the object as someone who is as a person or a thing that is essentially powerless, right? We want to maintain this. We want to maintain an emotion of an air of vulnerability, especially for the cute object, and that's why cuteness is everywhere. It's the predominant form of attraction right now. We don't really say of course we still say that people are beautiful or hot or whatever, but the most frequent term is someone is cute, right? Or a thing is cute, or a person or an animal is cute, because there's a whole sense of powerlessness there. And of course this can be taken in a way that's perverse, as we wrote quite a bit in our book. We can understand cuteness as trying to maintain this power imbalance that really preserves this kind of powerless vulnerability, but also a kind of safe status quo, so to speak. But on the other hand, it can also really, we can take it in a way that's just we see something as cute and we reflect back on ourselves in a way that's just, can we take care of this cute object? For example, the way that we see cute, the way that a baby is cute, or a small animal is cute, right? Because there's this whole either we see a cute object by maintaining the distance, the powerlessness, or we see a cute object in the sense that we acknowledge the vulnerability and our own vulnerability, and we build solidarity through it. So that's the kind of thing that we have to we feel that we have to really grasp and delineate, like, how do we see things that are even things that are frivolous, things that are very an everyday emotion and an everyday things, such as cute selfies or cute memes or stuff like that. Like, where do these aesthetics come from? Where do these why do we tend to see what is desirable in a certain light? Why is it cuteness? Why is it not, like, I don't know, like a powerful beauty in some other sense, in other parts of time and culture, for example? Why do these things appear? And again, we kind of related that to the logic of the database, where we quote unquote mutilate some an object in a way that we really dismantle the elements of that object, and we collect those objects and we make other things cute. We tend to want to render other people that are safe as cute, because we want to preserve this kind of vulnerability. But then again, it's a very, once you dig into it, like, cuteness or the cute gaze can be a very, very complex emotion, tied to the trauma of defeat, tied to the failure of masculinity, even tied to post-war trauma in Japan. Like, there's a lot of cultural context in which why some things, some notions of beauty, some notions of desirability appear as opposed to others. And we think that's really tied to the way sexuality is constructed online today, and the way that our behavior is constructed online, designed online, serve certain purposes.
Mm. Yeah, and just to add to that, also that we kind of talk quite a bit about that in the book as well. How the interfaces that we're using, how the very kind of design of something like Tinder or social media or Instagram filters or memes or whatever, it's all cute. It's all about kind of funny or cute kind of emojis and hearts and things like that, and filters, and it's cuteness is so important there to kind of sort of take that into account in analysis. That's what really kind of motivated us to kind of write about that, and also to by kind of linking it to sort of the kind of cultural history of cuteness in the in the Japanese context, and also a little bit in the kind of K-pop Korean context as well, that has kind of has had such an influence across the world, really, not just when it comes to design on social media design, or kind of the design of the internet and interfaces and so on, but as a kind of general sort of symptom, as a kind of contemporary symptom that we need to kind of interrogate. Yeah.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Again, that's why I'm so glad you all are thinking about these things. Is there anything else you wanted to mention? Do you have anything coming up, or anytime you ever have anything new that you want to talk about, you're always welcome to contact me like you did and let me know, and you can come on the podcast to talk about it.
Thank you. I mean, we're kind of working on kind of thinking about sort of what sort of follows from this book, when I mean, the book is going to be published in January, so it's coming out in January, and then we're kind of thinking about what sort of what follows from some of our discussions in the book, particularly as we move towards the end of the book. So we're kind of thinking about those questions that maybe remain in need of further kind of analysis. Yeah,
we finished writing that in like maybe around, no, actually earlier than this month, last year, I think. I kind of forgot when exactly we kind of finished it, Jacob, but yeah, since that time, and even up to the time of the publishing, it's just a lot of new things, because that's the thing with writing a book about the internet, right? Because new things will up, but yeah, so we do think that this is a very dynamic sort of field to analyze, and obviously there are new things, and then new evolutions of things that we new developments of things that we wrote in the book. So I think it's also very crucial to always be on the lookout. I mean, obviously I do believe that all of the things that we write in the book, like the whole framework, still stands and will still continue to stand. But the practical examples and the practical how people might react to certain developments, like certain new technological developments, those things will always keep evolving, right? And I think theory needs to continue to also evolve and adapt, and to find new ways of liberation, find new ways of liberatory potentials of these things, of the gaps between technology and desire, and how people see and utilize those technologies, and how people see themselves and construct their own identities through these kinds of technology. So yeah, we are thinking of what can be a follow-up to this, but also we mentioned that it's a pretty thin book. It's not a very thick book because it's like this, but this is because we had to cut about 50% of the whole of the actual manuscript, because it had a lot of case studies and examples and like really theoretical details that didn't make it into the book. We have begun to put them up online so people can read them freely. I mean, I haven't been diligent enough to actually continue the plan with the articles, but it should be coming up, right? So if people want to get a taste of the book, like what can they actually, if they want to, I won't say it's like free chapters, but because it's not inside the book, but it's supplemental materials. Like if people want to get a feel of what they might encounter in the book, they can also visit our Medium blog. Apparently we're still blogging, if you can call that blogging, but yeah.
Very cool. And I'm seeing Rendering Unconscious is also a book. It came out in 2019, but the original edition is almost sold out. There's literally like 2 left. So I'm gonna make an expanded paperback edition. So if you have like a little snippet or an essay or something that you would want to put in the book, let me know. Just send it over and I'll include it.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's really fun.
Thank you. Yeah, we had fun talking about this. I mean, it's all
thank you.
Talk about our book, right?
Exactly. And I think what you brought up too at the end is also as the internet being a sort of mirror and people developing their identity in a way through the internet. I think that's really important as well, because that's with like Lacan's mirror stage and like looking at the mirror and seeing yourself and then kind of internalizing that, and that being an ongoing process. And people do that through relations with other people, but now we can do that online as well. And I think that's another aspect of the internet that's really valuable. Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Bonni Rambatan and Jacob Johanssen. Definitely check out their book, Event Horizon: Sexuality, Politics, Online Culture, and the Limits of Capitalism, from Zero Books, January 2022. And follow them at Twitter. You can follow Bonni at Bonnibel_R at Twitter. That's BONNIBEL_R at Twitter. And you can follow Jacob at JacobPhD at Twitter. That's JACOB_PhD at Twitter. You can also check out my previous discussion with Jacob Johanssen, Rendering Unconscious podcast episode number 23. You can visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org, for links and more information. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at rawsin_. That's RAWSIN_. And now, To Be Back With You, a collaboration I did with Val Denham, set to music and arranged by Carl Abrahamson, on the album Message 23, available at Highbrow Lowlife's Bandcamp page. That's highbrowlowlife.bandcamp.com. Music is also streaming on online platforms such as Spotify and iTunes. Enjoy.
Like a bullet from a gun in the setting sun, I'm looking for the day when kingdom comes. Cause looking at tomorrow and an end to all the sorrow, no more famine, greed or war, and an ending of the sores. All the people are the same. Let us try to use our brain, do not perpetrate the pain. Let us act as though we're sane when all troubles have been done and the war is almost won. No more blood will have to run like smoke, smoke from a gun, yo. Smoke, smoke from a gun.
Have dared to traverse. Expansion.
Often, on a weekday, an
Time.
old rusty projector would burn its tiny blue sun across dark and smoke-filled lines and fall
announces
upon the
that
virgin white expanse of the
perversion as
two-dimensional
sexual.
prairie. Usually, black and white old
Expansion.
movies would spring back to life after slumbering in corroding
Shuffle
tins,
into.
often for years.
What I
This
don't
was the
mean
magic
is a
of the
pile
lost
of
films,
bills.
such relics as the Triple
Sometimes
X,
you say,
Andy Warhol's
I've got
Flesh,
enough.
The Red Shoes,
A
Pandora's
biological.
Box, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and
This
Vileness Facts
first
would spring
rays
to life
of
once more before the film began,
movement
and the screen would be painted
of
in fresh
humility,
beeswax for the purpose of catching any
forms.
stray screen spirits.
So he
Once a
gave
Judy Garland-type
and
entity was
spanned.
caught like an ant
They
jam,
can.
placed in the appropriate refrigeration unit until it grew to the size of a healthy
And
sunflower, and
trans.
oh my, how good it looked. All
Contact.
silver pink worms and cracks with spikes of royal amethyst
2016.
spilling out of its many tiny orifices, just like it should have been, just like in olden times. And singing too, singing songs such as Somewhere
I'm so perfect.
over the cyclotron.
Contained a small.
And then
Out
all
to
those
perform a
days
ritual.
and beeswax screen
or
strategies.
attend the
Sometimes Good
next.
Queen Whirlpool would show the movies sideways,
What can I say
just so
to be
that
back
we
with
could see
you?
both sides of the coin at the same time, or project the
Program.
film backwards so that by the time we'd get to
We're
the
cutting
beginning of the
ourselves out
film,
of
we were
hours.
slightly younger in our outlooks.
To be back with
Films
you.
are much more fun when it's sunny
To be back
outside.
with you.
God knows why, but it's true. Of course, it's often a much
Ejaculation
better idea
inside,
to use your own
a more
soundtrack
or less
and just
receptive
turn the sound
orifice.
down on the film and see whatever happens
Art
in the
is
film
that
will seem to
before
synchronize
which
with your
For
alternative
whom
new soundtrack.
we bow
Try it.
down in gratitude.
On weekends, Good Queen Whirlpool
Art is a
would
greatness
booze until all the
amidst
blue
the
flower
small.
shrubs in the vicinity would begin to
But
wilt
art
and
is
wither.
also tearing down
Sleepy drifters
the
would
great.
sliver past on classical
What will it
instrumentation and
take?
cellos, moaning like jealous black
Fly
whales in
away,
transit
accursed
from
bird.
one shanty town to the next. Violins
What
would
do I
cut
have to do?
neurotransmitters like wine through yogurt.
Fly
And
away
bass drums
into
beat like the
the night.
hearts of the depressed in the deep south of America. Good Queen Whirlpool never spoke of our place in the universe on these occasions without a focus. For these were the Pinot Noir days, or the hours of the
Ejaculation
savage moon.
inside.
Hangovers were placed in obelisks, and obelisks were placed in aircraft hangars. For she knew that all the pyramids are really launch pads to Orion, and that they are a mirror of constellations in the pit black sky. The obelisks only mirror us and our excesses, either in films or booze or in our dream life. Columns of glass water rise,
Ejaculation inside a more or less receptive orifice. Art is that before which, for
Glimpses of
whom
the
you bow
divine blue
down
sky,
in gratitude.
in and out of waterfalls,
Art is a
liquids
greatness
full floating
amidst
in
the small.
unison. Specks
But
of
art is
microscopic
also tearing
water
down
droplets
the
cool
great.
my face.
What will it take? Fly away,
We're
accursed bird. What do I have to do? Fly away into the night.
We're going to the future.